This anime begins with a volcano erupting on Ayaka Island, causing some damage to the island. 10 years later, a young man named Yanagi Yukito just finished middle school in Tokyo. Yukito was born on Ayaka Island but moved to Japan after his dad, Yanagi Makoto, passed away when he was just 5. On his graduation day, Yukito gets a surprise visit from Sagawa Jinhee, one of his dad's students, who takes him back to Ayaka Island. When they arrive at Ayaka, Yukito meets another of his dad's students, Inu Sanji, who is now the guardian and mayor of the island and will be taking care of Yukito. He also meets Amamiya Momoko. The group heads to Momoko's house, where Yukito will be staying. Yukito is curious about why he was suddenly brought back to the island. Sanji and the others explain that his dad wanted him to learn magic to help protect the island from mysterious creatures called Mitama. But when Yukito asks about his mom, nobody knows who she is. The next day, Yukito was practicing meditation in the yard at Momoko's house to get better at controlling his magic. However, his mentor Jinhee showed off his own magic by creating a water figure, which really impressed Yukito. Yukito wondered when he'd be able to control his magic like Jinhee. Soon after, Jinhee confessed to Yukito that he owed money to a local alcohol seller and asked Yukito to help him protect the island from a monster called Mitama. At first, Yukito was hesitant to help since he knew Jinhee often drank too much. But when Jinhee offered to teach him advanced magic control techniques, Yukito agreed to help fight off the Mitama monster showing up on the island. They quickly began to check the local complaint letters that residents had sent about the monster. Meanwhile, 2 students of another master, Fuquake Chataro and Amano Yako, were also looking through the complaint mailboxes about the Mitama. They ended up arguing over who should take on the mission from a complaint letter. But then, Jinhee stopped their fight by grabbing the letter and announcing that Yukito would handle it. Since Chataro and Yako didn't know Yukito, Jinhee proudly introduced him as the son of the legendary lay master Makoto. This surprised the 2 students as they realized Yukito's significant heritage. Not long after, Jinhee and Yukito went on a mission to a river area after locals reported seeing a creature called Mitama. When they got to the riverbank, they were shocked to see a water monster about to attack them. Suddenly, Jinhee ran off, yelling at Yukito to fight the monster. With no other choice, Yukito ran too, but the monster chased them. To escape, they both jumped into the river. Once safe, they climbed out near a spot where someone was fishing and made a campfire to dry off. While warming up, they talked about how to beat the water monster. They then went to a hill to watch the monster, but their arguing made enough noise to alert it. The monster attacked Jinhee, who quickly told Yukito to do something. Yukito tried to use his magic to stop the monster but failed. Luckily, Master Haruaki arrived just in time with his wind powers and defeated the monster, leaving Yukito in awe of his abilities. After making sure the water monster was gone, Haruaki took Yukito back to Momoko's house. Meanwhile, Jinhee had to clean up trash from the river as punishment for his mistakes, including drinking and littering. Chataro and Yako supervised his punishment. When Yukito and Haruaki got to Momoko's house, Momoko decided to make curry for dinner. At first, Yukito was unsure about the fish heads in the curry, but after tasting it, he was surprised by how good it was. Haruaki noticed Yukito enjoying his meal and mentioned that Yukito used to love curry as a little kid. Another day, Yukito was really excited to ride the sea train, which surprised Jinhee because Yukito had been on it before moving to Tokyo. Jinhee's comments annoyed Yukito, who asked him not to make remarks about him. They were on their way to First Island, a popular tourist spot, to meet Sanji, the mayor. When they met, Yukito told Sanji how much he enjoyed the sea train ride to First Island, which made Sanji happy to see Yukito more excited than when they first met. Sanji then asked Jinhee to show Yukito around the island. Hearing that, Jinhee agreed, even though he had originally planned to enjoy the day by himself. Soon after, Jinhee and Yukito were in the bustling city center when Jinhee suddenly left, separating from Yukito without any warning. At that time, some residents were excited because a creature called Mitama was spotted nearby. Curious, Yukito quickly went to check it out and even broke through a security area to get closer. There, he tried to use his strength to fight the creature. Unfortunately, Yukito's attempt didn't work, and the creature was about to attack him back. Just then, a man named Ibukiaka, who was a former student of Yukito's dad and now the director of Ayaka Security, showed up and used his magic to make the creature disappear. After the fight, aka invited Yukito to his restaurant. There, Yukito was surprised to see Jinghee working. At that time, Yukito complained to Jinghee for disappearing and leaving him alone earlier. There, Jinghee explained he had to work at the restaurant, which is why he left. Soon after, one of AKA's workers, Ichiju Ibara, rushed in to tell them about a bigger Mitama that had appeared. Soon after, AKA and Ibara quickly headed to the location, followed by Yukito and Jinghee, who were curious to see the monster. On their way, Yukito, impressed by AKA's abilities, wondered if AKA was also a master like Haruaki. Jinghee didn't give much detail, but he warned Yukito not to talk about AKA in front of Haruaki because the two had unresolved issues. When Yukito and Jinghee arrived where the Mitama was seen, they found AKA and his team confronting the monster. Some of AKA's team were using special rifles powered by magic to fight the creature. At that moment, AKA himself faced the monster directly, absorbed its power, and then used that power to attack it back. There, Jinghee explained to Yukito that the magic technique AKA used was considered forbidden and not recommended by other magic users. Despite this, it seemed to make AKA stronger and allowed him to defeat the Mitama more easily. AKA even boasted that he was stronger than Haruaki and other masters, which surprised Yukito. Later, Yukito and Jinghee went back to Ayaka to meet with Haruaki. Soon after, they arrived at the train station, and Jinghee was seen carrying alcoholic drinks, which he planned to share with the master. At that time, Yukito was surprised by Jinghee's habit of drinking regardless of the time. They hurried to Haruaki's place at the Dragon God Shrine, where Chotaro and Yako were waiting. While Chotaro and Yako were talking to Yukito, Jinghee suddenly invited Haruaki's student to drink with the master. However, the three of them ended up slipping in a mud puddle because Jinghee carelessly hugged Chotaro and Yako. Meanwhile, Haruaki showed up and greeted Yukito, ignoring Jinghee and the others' clumsy act. However, because their clothes got muddy, Jinghee, Chotaro, and Yako decided to go relax in the hot springs. Meanwhile, Yukito was with Haruaki, who took him to the temple library. While they were there, Yukito suddenly asked Haruaki about AKA's strength, which he had witnessed on First Island. Haruaki was surprised by the question, but Yukito admitted he was really curious and hoped Haruaki would explain. Haruaki then told him that AKA was using a forbidden method to absorb the power of Mitama to become stronger. After Yukito understood this, Haruaki asked him about the magic Jinghee had taught him. Soon after, Yukito shared everything he learned from his mentor. Since Yukito's answers were all correct, Haruaki couldn't find fault with Jinghee's teachings, but mentioned he would show Yukito a different kind of magical power. After Yukito talked with Haruaki, he met Chotaro and Yako, who had just finished bathing, and invited him to go for a walk. Meanwhile, Jinghee talked with Haruaki, who was curious about Yukito and AKA's recent encounter. Back with Yukito and his friends, when they reached a field, Chotaro and Yako showed off their magic by growing small plants. But to everyone's surprise, Yukito managed to grow a large tree that kept producing fruit non-stop until Jinghee stepped in to help control Yukito's power and stop the tree from growing. At that moment, Jinghee was pleased with how much Yukito's abilities had developed, even though Yukito still couldn't fully control his powers. After Jinghee left, Chotaro and Yako complimented Yukito's skills and tried to convince him to become one of Haruaki's protégés. Yukito turned them down because he didn't want to feel like he was betraying Jinghee, who had helped him a lot. On another day, Yukito practiced his power control, but he got frustrated after several unsuccessful attempts. At the same time, Haruaki was nearby, enjoying his drink and lost in thought. The next day, Yukito and Jinghee had breakfast with Momoko. After breakfast, Jinghee casually asked Momoko for money, and she quickly gave it to him. Yukito was puzzled about why Momoko let Jinghee ask for money so easily. Jinghee just laughed and didn't explain why. Shortly after, Yukito and Jinghee visited Makoto's grave to lay offerings, joined by several residents of Ayaka who also prayed for protection from Makoto's spirit following a minor earthquake the previous night. During their visit, Yukito overheard Jinghee and the others discussing a dragon spirit that brought disaster to Ayaka. He learned that Makoto was believed to have died after battling this dragon spirit, which caused a volcanic eruption on the island. After the conversation, the residents left, and Jinghee took Yukito to visit his own parents' grave. Even though Yukito didn't know Jinghee's parents, He prayed alongside his mentor. As they were leaving the cemetery, Yukito and Jinghee ran into Chotaro and Yako, who had found some items dropped by Ibara, a member of the group led by AKA. The two students didn't want to meet Ibara themselves and asked Yukito and Jinghee for help returning the items. Without delay, Yukito and Jinghee headed to AKA's restaurant to return the lost items. They spoke with the bartender, Makita Taihei, who was also part of Ayaka's security. While they were talking, Ibara arrived at the restaurant and greeted everyone warmly. There, Yukito quickly handed over the items found by Chotaro and Yako. Just then, they received urgent news about the appearance of an Mitama fire spirit on the island, prompting everyone to rush off to confront the spirit before it could wreak havoc in the city. When they got to the scene, Ibara immediately faced off against the monster, but it was too much for her. Just as the fire Mitama was about to attack Ibara, Yukito quickly used his power to create a protective shield around her. There, Ibara was stunned because she didn't expect Yukito to save her. At that moment, Ibara remembered a scary incident from her childhood. 10 years ago, a fire caused by an Mitama engulfed her house, terrifying her as her parents were trapped inside. They urged her to escape just as the monster appeared, but then AKA showed up just in time to rescue her. Back in the present, Yukito's act of saving her reminded her of when AKA saved her. Meanwhile, Yukito was still fighting the Mitama's fire attack. He saw a chance and attacked the monster, but his attack wasn't strong enough to defeat it. As Yukito continued to defend against the monster's attacks, Chotaro and Yako arrived to help. However, Yukito told them and Ibara to get away because the monster's power was becoming too much for him to handle. At that time, Ibara refused to leave and stood up to help Yukito fight the Mitama. Even though they worked together, they still couldn't stop the monster. At the same time, more fire Mitama appeared, causing Yukito and his friends to panic even more. Fortunately, Haruaki and AKA arrived to confront the Mitama. Using their powerful magic, the two masters managed to defeat the Mitama and other attacking monsters. However, after the monsters were defeated, Haruaki and AKA started arguing because they used different types of magic. They blamed each other and eventually started fighting. At that time, Jinghee had to step in to break up the fight. Realizing his mistake, Haruaki apologized to Jinghee and everyone else. After the conflict, Jinghee invited everyone, except the masters, to relax and chat together. During this time, Ibara asked Yukito, Chotaro, and Yako to exchange contact information. Initially, Chotaro and Yako hesitated because their masters didn't get along, but Ibara explained that her master, AKA, never stopped her from making friends despite the disagreements. Hearing this, Chotaro and Yako decided to share their contacts with Ibara. Yukito was pleased to see everyone becoming friends despite their masters' differences. The scene shifts back to the past. So at that time, Haruaki and AKA, who were students of Makoto, had just come home from a big fight with an Mitama. They were at a diner where Momoko was helping them treat their injuries from the fight. While there, Haruaki and AKA couldn't stop arguing about what had happened during the fight. Meanwhile, Jinghee, who was a younger student along with little Yukito, told Yukito that Haruaki and AKA always fought because they were actually close friends. After Momoko finished treating their wounds, everyone, including Jinghee and Yukito, went back to Momoko's house. Makoto then came out and joined everyone in the conversation. At that time, Momoko, as usual, made fish head curry for lunch. After enjoying the tasty meal, Makoto and his students went out to the yard to talk about how to get better at using their magic. When it was Haruaki's turn to speak, he mentioned that his magic had gotten stronger than the levels Makoto had taught, but he also admitted he wasn't fully confident in using his new powers. Hearing this, AKA commented and urged Haruaki to be more confident, suggesting that Haruaki's skills might make him Makoto's successor. At that time, Makoto, knowing his students were highly skilled, started talking about a very important temple ritual that Haruaki and AKA needed to perform to honor the dragon god. There, he explained that this ritual was critical and had to be done carefully because any mistake could lead to a major disaster on Ayaka Island. Although Makoto was a bit unsure about letting Haruaki and AKA handle the ritual alone, he tried to reassure himself that his two best students could manage it. Still worried, he decided to keep an eye on them as they performed the ritual. On the other hand, Jinghee, who was younger, wanted to join his seniors, but Makoto stopped him because Jingi's skills weren't strong enough yet. The next day, the island's residents started to panic as the weather turned more severe, making them worry that an Mitama might have appeared. Soon after, Haruaki and AKA quickly headed to the mountain to start the ritual Makoto had talked about. Meanwhile, Jingi was tasked with staying home to look after Yukito and Momoko. There, Makoto instructed Jingi that if the situation worsened, he and the others should evacuate to a ship that was ready to go. Then, when Haruaki and AKA reached the top of the mountain, they started a ritual to calm down an angry Mitama that was causing destruction on the island. They worked together trying to stop the monster's power to save everyone on Ayaka Island. Unfortunately, their efforts didn't work, and AKA got hurt. Just as they were about to give up, their teacher, Makoto, showed up to help them. He blocked the Mitama and told Haruaki to quickly get AKA to safety. At that time, AKA didn't want to leave, but Haruaki had to carry him away from the mountain while Makoto continued the ritual they had started. The next morning, worried about Makoto, Haruaki and AKA went back to the mountain top. They were devastated to find that Makoto had died fighting the Mitama the night before. AKA was upset with Haruaki for taking him away from the mountain, believing that they could have helped Makoto if they had stayed. This incident caused their friendship to worsen, and they started to dislike each other. The scene shifts back to the present. Now, Yukito was really surprised to hear from Momoko about the falling out between Haruaki and AKA, who used to be close friends. On the other hand, Jingi, listening in from outside, seemed relaxed even though he had known about their history for a long time. Jingi never wanted to get involved in Haruaki and AKA's arguments because he respected them both as his seniors. On a different day, while relaxing on the house's porch, Yukito suddenly felt a surge of power inside him that he couldn't control. At that time, Jingi noticed that Yukito often struggled with this powerful energy, so he always tried to stay close to help Yukito manage it without losing control. Recently, Yukito received a text on his phone from Ibara, inviting him to a cultural festival happening on Sunday night. Upon hearing that, Yukito was excited about the invitation, but Jingi secretly peeked at Yukito's phone conversation and was glad to see Yukito making more friends in Ayaka. Yukito was a bit annoyed that his mentor had read his message, but this only made Jingi more excited to help Yukito get ready for his outing with Ibara at the festival. Jingi even gave Yukito a mask to wear to the festival. On the night of the festival, Yukito and Jingi dressed up in traditional clothes and masks they had prepared earlier. Excitedly, they headed to the festival location, which was bustling with people enjoying various activities and snacking at the food stalls. Since it was Yukito's first time at a festival, he felt nervous, which made Jingi laugh. Soon after, Yukito met Ibara, who looked stunning in her traditional outfit. There, Jingi nudged Yukito to start a conversation with Ibara, even though they both felt a bit awkward at first. Later that night, Yukito also ran into Chotaro and Yako, and they all walked together. They stopped by Haruaki's stall to chat for a bit before exploring other stalls at the festival. Soon after, they bumped into Momoko, who had set up her own stall. At that time, they invited them to visit, and they were all quite surprised when Momoko suddenly started drinking sake directly from a barrel, alongside other visitors who were also enjoying a drink. Wanting to see more of the festival, Yukito and his friends continued walking around. Suddenly, Ibara received a call from AKA, who asked her to pass her phone to Yukito. AKA wanted to check on how Ibara was doing at the festival, which made Yukito realize that AKA really cared about his student, showing him that AKA was a good person for worrying about Ibara going to the festival alone. Shortly after hanging up and giving Ibara her phone back, Yukito suddenly felt dizzy because the powerful energy inside him started to spiral out of control. He quickly stepped away from his friends and hid behind a tree to use the techniques Jingi had taught him to manage his strength. Thankfully, his efforts worked, and he was able to regain control and rejoin his friends. Later, after spending more time with Ibara and the others, Yukito found Jingi sitting alone, drinking beer. There, Yukito thanked him for teaching him how to control his powers. Just then, there was a disturbance on Ayaka Island, and Jingi seemed to brace himself for action. Before leaving, Jingi suddenly asked Yukito a serious question about his thoughts on Ayaka. Surprised by the serious tone from Jingi, Yukito was initially hesitant to answer. But there, Jingi became upset and insisted on an answer, So Yukito admitted that he liked Ayaka because it brought him close to good friends, even though the island faced disasters. Hearing this, Jinghee just disappeared, leaving Yukito by himself. Worried about his mentor, Yukito hurried back to Momoko's house. The next morning, an earthquake woke Yukito up, and he quickly got out of bed to look for Momoko. At that moment, Yukito suddenly felt his immense power spiraling out of control again, and he even had a strange vision related to his abilities. Fortunately, he managed to regain control over his powers. Soon after, Momoko came out of her room and urged Yukito to head to the ship that was evacuating people from the increasingly dangerous island. There, Yukito asked Momoko to come with him, but she refused because she needed to ensure that all the residents were safely evacuated. Understanding her duty, Yukito didn't press further and decided to head to the refugee ship right away. Meanwhile, Ibara was with AKA, who was struggling to control himself because he had absorbed the power of an evil spirit while confronting Mitama. Not wanting to put Ibara in danger, AKA left her behind, especially since she was instructed not to follow him. Back to Yukito, he ended up meeting Haruaki and his students who had come to Momoko's house. During their meeting, Haruaki took the opportunity to discuss Ayaka Island with Yukito. He explained the origin of the island's disasters, which began 15 years ago when the water dragon's power started to weaken and the fire dragon's power became uncontrollable, leading to catastrophic events on the island. To save Ayaka Island, Makoto performed a ritual to gain the power of a water dragon by harnessing the dragon's weakened life force. This life force transformed into a baby boy, whom Makoto then adopted. Listening to Haruaki's story, Yukito realized that he was that baby boy, and as the embodiment of the water dragon, he was the only one who could counteract the fire dragon's power. After finishing his talk with Yukito, Haruaki said goodbye to him and his two students, preparing to perform the same ritual as Makoto to save the island's people. Yukito and the others then understood that Haruaki was planning to sacrifice himself to stop the fire dragon. As the situation on the island worsened, Chotaro and Yako urged Yukito to escape for safety, but suddenly Ibara showed up asking Yukito to help the masters fight the power of the Mitama, which was linked to the fire dragon. At that time, Ibara's plea convinced Yukito and his friends that they needed to support their masters, so they rushed to join them at the mountain top. Meanwhile, Haruaki was battling the fire dragon's power when unexpectedly, AKA arrived to assist him. Shortly after, Yukito and the others also reached the site, surprising the masters with their arrival. Back when they were younger, Jinghee was playing with Yukito. During their play, Yukito unexpectedly used water magic that almost drowned Jinghee. When Makoto found out, he quickly freed Jinghee from Yukito's water magic. Surprised by Yukito's abilities, Jinghee wondered how such a young child could cast magic like an adult. Makoto then felt compelled to reveal to Jinghee that Yukito was the embodiment of Ayaka Island's water dragon. At that time, Jinghee became the only student to know this secret. Then, Makoto also mentioned that one day, Yukito would transform back into a water dragon to save the island. This made Jinghee curious if Yukito would be able to turn back into a human after becoming a dragon again. Since Makoto didn't have an answer yet, he promised to think about it. Fast forward to the present, Yukito and his friends were committed to combining their powers to help the masters battle the fire dragon. However, Yukito felt guilty because he couldn't help defeat the dragon. Despite this, he didn't give up and quickly reinforced his protective shield to shield Ibara and the others from the dragon's fiery attack. Meanwhile, Haruaki and AKA continued to fight the fire dragon, with Yukito and the rest supporting them as much as they could. During this, Yukito hoped he would grow stronger so that he could one day defeat the evil fire dragon himself. A while ago, after Makoto told Jinghee all about Yukito's origins and powers, Jinghee kept everything a secret. When Makoto sadly passed away, everyone, including Jinghee, was heartbroken. However, Jinghee didn't want to blame others like his seniors did for Makoto's death. Instead, he decided to learn more about Yukito and how he could help him, since Yukito was destined to protect the island. In the afternoon, Jinghee sneaked into Makoto's room and found a spell that could transform Yukito into a water dragon. From that day, Jinghee secretly studied various magical techniques and rituals that could save Ayaka Island. In the present, Jinghee suddenly showed up at the top of the mountain, surprising Yukito, who didn't expect his mentor to follow him there. There, Jinghee announced that he was there to help Yukito fulfill his destiny of saving the island. Without hesitating, Jinghee took Yukito into another dimension and dove into the ocean. Having learned the ritual to summon a water dragon, Jinghee cast a spell to transform Yukito into a dragon. Although Jinghee knew this ritual might cost him his life, he was willing to make the sacrifice, believing it was necessary to save the island, much like Makoto had intended. Shortly after completing the spell, which left him unconscious, Yukito transformed into a water dragon and confronted the fire dragon. Soon after, the two dragons clashed, each using their powerful abilities. Before all the trouble started on Ayaka Island, Yukito was looking through the fridge for some fish when Momoko told him they were all out, so she couldn't make fish curry that day. Meanwhile, Jinghee was outside grilling a fish and having a beer, which annoyed Yukito because that was the fish Momoko planned to cook. At that time, Yukito complained about it, but Jinghee just shrugged it off, saying that grilling fish and drinking beer was his way of enjoying life. At the same time, Momoko saw what Jinghee was doing and scolded him, although Jinghee didn't really pay attention to him. What Yukito and Momoko didn't realize was that Jinghee was living carefree on purpose. Jinghee knew he was going to sacrifice himself to save the island and wanted to enjoy every moment of his life before facing his destiny. Back in the present, Yukito, now transformed into a water dragon, was battling the fierce fire dragon. Despite the tough fight, Yukito was determined not to give up, remembering Jinghee's sacrifice to help him transform. To try and win, Yukito launched a counterattack against the fire dragon. Meanwhile, Ibara asked Haruaki about Yukito, who had transformed into a water dragon. There, Haruaki explained that he had known Yukito's true nature for a long time. Although it was Yukito's first time as a water dragon, Haruaki believed that the various attack techniques he learned from Jinghee would help him defeat the fire dragon. Using what Jinghee taught him, Yukito managed to defeat the fire dragon and restore peace to Ayaka Island. After turning back into a human, Yukito found Jinghee, who had passed away. Soon, the news of Jinghee's sacrifice to protect the island spread, and Sanji and his team were busy handling many calls of condolences. At the funeral, Jinghee's family and friends gathered to honor him. They discussed the heavy burden Jinghee carried secretly until his death. At the same time, Haruaki and AKA released their pent-up emotions and resolved their misunderstandings, hoping to rebuild their friendship as it was before. Soon after, Yukito, who felt deeply moved, went into Jinghee's room to see his mentor's face one last time. But then, Yukito found himself in a different dimension where he saw Jinghee screaming for help because he was trapped there. Yukito realized that it might still be possible to save his mentor. When he came back to his senses in the real world, he quickly told Sanji and Momoko that Jinghee's soul was stuck in this other dimension and that Jinghee could be brought back to life if they could rescue his soul. Without wasting any time, Yukito returned to the other dimension and began searching for Jinghee. During his search, he encountered Makoto, who complimented Jinghee for looking after Yukito well. It was then that Yukito recognized the figure before him as his father. He was overjoyed to reunite with his father, who had chosen to enter this dimension to control the fire dragon's power and protect Ayaka Island. In that moment, Yukito was touched to hear his father's commitment to his duty as lay master. Knowing why Yukito had come into this dimension, Makoto joined his son in the quest to find Jinghee. Feeling hopeful that Jinghee could indeed be saved, they continued their search. Eventually, they found Jinghee nearly drowning in a river within the dimension. Yukito quickly grabbed Jinghee's clothes and pulled him out of the river, hoping to bring him safely back. During that time, Yukito and Jinghee got into an argument, which prompted Makoto to step in and help them make up. After Yukito achieved his goal of finding Jinghee, Makoto, who could no longer return to the human world, said his goodbyes to both of them and left the dimension forever. Yukito felt sad about parting from his father, but was proud of him for always protecting the island. Meanwhile, Haruaki and AKA worked together to pull Yukito and Jinghee out of the other dimension. Thanks to their efforts, they successfully brought Yukito back to the human world and revived Jinghee, who everyone thought was gone for good. In that moment, Ibara and the others were thrilled to see Yukito again, while Momoko was surprised when Jinghee woke up and immediately asked for a beer, claiming he was very thirsty after being in another dimension for too long. At the same time, Sanji was shocked to find Jinghee alive again. He even thought Jinghee might be a ghost at first. Hearing that, Jinghee just smiled, and then Sanji scolded him for causing so much worry among everyone. After some time, life on Ayaka Island began to feel normal again, and Yukito was excited to start high school. Before his first day, Yukito tried on his school uniform and showed it to Momoko and Jinghee, who were both pleased to see him ready for the new chapter. At the end of the anime, the scene shifts to the next day where Ibara and others were eagerly waiting for Yukito at their new school. Together, they walked through the school gates, ready to begin their lessons. Now, Yukito felt happy and grateful to have met such good friends like Ibara and the others on Ayaka Island. The anime ends. The moral lesson from this anime is always check the fridge before you start grilling the last fish, or you might end up in another dimension trying to save your buddy from a river. And hey, if you ever get stuck in a magical bind, just remember a cold beer can fix almost anything, even interdimensional thirst.